Darius King stood in the center of the courtroom and adjusted his silk tie, feeling like he had just pulled off the robbery of the century. The judge had just slammed the gavel down, finalizing the divorce decree that left his wife, Nia, with absolutely nothing. No house, no alimony, and no shares in the logistics empire they had built together over 10 years. Darius looked across the aisle at Nia. She was slumped in her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beside her sat her mother, Mama Esther, an elderly woman in a faded Sunday hat who sat as still as a stone statue. Darius suppressed a laugh. He had won. He had hidden millions in offshore accounts, framed Nia for financial incompetence, and secured his future as the Bachelor King of Atlanta. He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered that it was too easy, that Nia was weak and her family was irrelevant. But Darius made a fatal mistake that afternoon. He confused silence with defeat. He didn't know that Mama Esther wasn't just a quiet old lady who grew vegetables in the backyard. He didn't know that the notebook resting on her lap contained the serial numbers to every single one of his hidden bank accounts. Darius thought he had stripped them of their power, but he was about to learn a brutal lesson. You can steal a woman's money, but you should never, ever underestimate her mother. Before we dive into this twisting saga of arrogance and ancestral justice, I have a question for you. Do you believe that what goes around eventually comes around? If you want to see exactly how a humble grandmother brings a billionaire to his knees without ever raising her voice, do me a huge favor. Press that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this payback. The rain was pouring down in sheets when Darius walked out of the courthouse, but he didn't feel the cold. He felt invincible. He stepped into the back of his waiting limousine, leaving Nia and Mama Esther to wait for a taxi in the downpour. Inside the car, the air smelled of expensive leather and victory. Darius poured himself a glass of champagne and pulled out his phone to text his mistress, Chloe. He typed 3 words, "It is done." He took a sip of the drink, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. He had big plans. He was going to evict Nia and Esther from their family home tomorrow morning. He was going to bulldoze their history to build a parking lot for his new fleet of trucks. He felt like a titan, a self-made god who answered to no one. But as the car turned the corner, his phone buzzed. It wasn't Chloe. It was a text from an unknown number. It didn't contain a threat or a demand for money. It was a single sentence that made the champagne turn sour in his stomach. The text read simply, "The lease on the land you are driving on has just expired." Darius frowned, dismissing it as a wrong number. He didn't know that the ground beneath his feet, the building he worked in, and the very road he was traveling on were all owned by a trust he had never bothered to investigate. A trust controlled by the woman he had just left standing in the rain. The war hadn't ended in that courtroom. It had just begun. Darius King stared at the text message on his phone screen until the backlight flickered and died, plunging the back of the limousine into darkness for a brief second before the passing streetlights illuminated his scowl. The message was absurd. It claimed the lease on the land he was driving on had expired, which was impossible because Darius King didn't lease land. He conquered it. He tossed the phone onto the plush leather seat beside him, dismissing the cryptic warning as a glitch or perhaps a desperate prank from one of Nia's low-rent cousins. He adjusted his cufflinks, feeling the cold, reassuring weight of gold against his wrists. Tonight was not a night for paranoia. Tonight was a night for coronation. The driver navigated the wet streets of Atlanta with the smooth precision of a shark swimming through dark water, eventually pulling up to the curb of the Onyx Lounge, the most exclusive jazz club in the city. The valet opened the door before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop, bowing his head as Darius stepped out into the humid night air. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, misting against his expensive suit, but Darius didn't care. He walked past the long line of people waiting behind the velvet rope, offering them nothing but a sharp, dismissive glance. The bouncer lifted the rope immediately, murmuring a respectful greeting that Darius didn't bother to acknowledge. Inside, the club was a sensory overload of deep bass, clinking glass, and the heavy, expensive scent of cigars and designer perfume. Darius made his way to the VIP section on the mezzanine level, a glass-walled perch that looked down on the common crowd like a throne room. Waiting for him in the oversized booth was Chloe, a woman whose ambition was only matched by her appetite for diamonds, and Marcus, the lawyer who had just helped Darius bury his wife's future. Chloe squealed when she saw him, a high-pitched sound that cut through the low hum of the saxophone. She threw her arms around his neck, the sequins of her red dress scratching against his cheek. She smelled of vanilla and greed. Darius kissed her, but his eyes were open, scanning the room to see who was watching him. He wanted them to look. He wanted the city to know that Darius King was single, wealthy, and untouchable. He sat down, spreading his arms across the back of the booth, taking up as much space as possible. Marcus sat opposite him, nursing a tumbler of bourbon with a look that bordered on nausea. "You look like you're at a wake, Marcus," Darius shouted over the music, signaling the waitress to bring a bottle of their most expensive champagne. "We just won. Do you understand what we did today? We didn't just win a case, we performed surgery. We cut out the cancer." Marcus forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He loosened his tie, his fingers fumbling with the knot. "It was a brutal hearing, Darius. The judge, she didn't like it. Leaving Nia with nothing, not even the equity in the marital home, it's going to look bad in the press." Darius laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that originated from his chest. "The press loves a winner, Marcus, and Nia, she's not a victim, she's a casualty of war. She was dead weight. She wanted to play house while I wanted to build an empire. She was happy with a storefront, I wanted the skyline. I simply corrected the trajectory of my life." The waitress arrived with the champagne, the bottle sparking with a small firework attached to the neck, drawing the attention of the entire club. Darius soaked in the applause from the neighboring tables. He poured the golden liquid himself, filling 3 glasses to the brim. "To the future," he toasted, clinking his glass against Chloe's. "And to the past, may it stay buried in the dirt where it belongs." Marcus raised his glass reluctantly, his hand trembling just enough to make the liquid ripple. Darius watched him with a sneer. He knew Marcus was weak. That was why he hired him. A weak lawyer does what he is told. A weak lawyer hides the assets in the Cayman Islands shell company and doesn't ask questions about where the initial capital came from. A weak lawyer frames a wife for embezzlement by planting falsified ledgers in her car, ensuring that she walks away from the marriage with a criminal record instead of a settlement check. Darius had orchestrated it all, and Marcus had simply signed the paperwork. "So, when do we get the lake house?" Chloe asked, sipping her drink and looking at Darius with wide, expectant eyes. "I've already picked out new curtains. The ones Nia chose were so drab, beige. Everything she did was beige." Darius ran a hand through his hair, smiling at Chloe's eagerness. "The lake house is yours, baby, but first I have one last loose end to tie up, the eviction." The word hung in the air between them. Marcus choked on his drink, coughing violently. "Darius," Marcus wheezed, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "You can't be serious. You're going to evict them tomorrow. It's been less than 24 hours since the decree. Give them a week. Nia has nowhere to go, and her mother. Mama Esther is in her 70s. You can't just throw them on the street." Darius's eyes went cold. The warmth of the celebration evaporated instantly. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow louder than the music. "I can do whatever I want, Marcus. That house sits on the corner of 5th and Vine. Do you know what that corner is worth? I have plans for a new distribution hub. I need that land for the fleet parking." Every day that old woman sits on her porch rocking in that chair is costing me money. Nia had her chance. I offered her a settlement a year ago. She refused. She wanted to fight. So now she gets the consequences. He sat back, checking his Rolex. "I'm going over there first thing in the morning. I want them out by noon. I want the bulldozers rolling by 1 in the afternoon. And Marcus, you're coming with me. I need a witness in case the old hag tries to curse me with some voodoo nonsense." The party continued until 3 in the morning, but the text message from the limo ride kept itching at the back of Darius's mind. The lease has expired. It was nonsense. He owned the building. He owned the logistics yard. He owned the trucks. He was the CEO of King Logistics. He shook off the feeling of dread, drowning it in another glass of champagne. By the time he stumbled out of the club, leaning heavily on Chloe, he had forgotten all about the warning. He fell into the back of the car, his head spinning with dreams of concrete and steel. He didn't see the dark sedan parked across the street, the one with the tinted windows that rolled down just an inch as he drove away. He didn't see the flash of a camera lens capturing his drunken exit. And he certainly didn't know that inside that sedan sat a private investigator hired not by the police, and not by the FBI, but by a tomato farmer named Esther. The next morning, the sun rose behind a thick curtain of gray clouds, casting a gloomy pallor over the city of Atlanta. Darius woke up with a headache that felt like a nail being driven into his temple. He groaned, rolling over in the king-sized bed of his penthouse suite. Chloe was still asleep, her mouth slightly open, snoring softly. Darius got up, ignoring the nausea rolling in his stomach. He had work to do. He showered, scrubbing the smell of smoke and perfume from his skin, and dressed in a fresh suit. This one was charcoal gray, sharp, intimidating. It was his armor. He drank a cup of black coffee, popped 3 painkillers, and called for his driver. Today was the day he erased the last remnant of his past. The drive to Nia's mother's house took 40 minutes. As the luxury SUV left the gleaming towers of downtown and entered the older, humbler neighborhood of West End, Darius curled his lip in disgust. The streets here were narrow and lined with oak trees whose roots buckled the sidewalks. The houses were old Victorian builds, charming to some, but to Darius, they just looked like firewood. This was where he had met Nia 15 years ago. He was just a driver then, and she was a teacher. She had believed in him. She had lent him her savings to buy his first truck. Her mother, Mama Esther, had fed him Sunday dinners and prayed over his business plans. Darius pushed the memory away. Sentimentality was a weakness. He had paid them back. He had bought Nia cars and jewelry. It wasn't his fault she couldn't keep up with his ambition. The car pulled up to the house. It was a modest structure, painted a soft yellow with white trim. A large wrap-around porch dominated the front, cluttered with potted plants, wind chimes, and a worn wooden rocking chair. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. Darius hated it. He stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes splashing into a puddle of muddy water. He cursed under his breath, wiping the mud off on the grass. Marcus pulled up behind him in his own car, looking pale and terrified. "Darius," Marcus pleaded, walking up to him with his hands raised. "Let me handle this. You stay in the car, I'll talk to them. We can work out a timeline." Darius ignored him, marching up the front walk like a soldier invading enemy territory. "I don't want a timeline, Marcus. I want a parking lot." He didn't bother to knock. He pounded his fist on the heavy oak door, the sound echoing through the quiet morning air. "Open up," Darius shouted. "I know you're in there." There was a long silence, followed by the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door creaked open. Nia stood in the doorway. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen and red, her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing an old, oversized t-shirt that Darius recognized as one of his own from years ago. Seeing her like that didn't make him feel pity, it made him feel powerful. She was broken, and he was the one holding the hammer. "Darius," Nia whispered, her voice raspy from crying. "What are you doing here?" the judge said. "The judge said I had 30 days to vacate the marital home, but this is my mother's house. You can't be here." Darius pushed past her, stepping into the foyer. The house smelled of lavender and old paper. It was suffocating. "Correction, Nia," Darius said, his voice booming in the small hallway. "The judge gave you 30 days to leave my penthouse, but regarding this property, you seem to have forgotten the collateral agreement you signed 5 years ago when I expanded the fleet. You put this house up as security for the business loan, the loan that you defaulted on when you embezzled the company funds." Nia gasped, backing away from him until she hit the wall. "I didn't embezzle anything. You know I didn't. You forged my signature. You planted those files." Darius smirked, closing the distance between them. "Prove it. The court says you're a thief, Nia. And since the company seized the collateral to cover the losses, this house belongs to King Logistics now. And as the CEO, I am ordering an immediate eviction." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his inside pocket and slapped it against the wall next to her head. "This is the notice. You have until 12 noon. Anything left inside after that goes to the dump." "You can't do this," Nia sobbed, sliding down the wall to the floor. "Where are we supposed to go? Mama is sick. She can't move like this." "Darius, please. I gave you 10 years of my life. I gave you everything." Darius looked down at her, his expression bored. "And now you have nothing. That's how business works, Nia. Investment minus return equals net loss. You are a net loss. Get away from my daughter." The voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room grow heavy. Darius turned around. Mama Esther was sitting in the parlor in her favorite armchair by the fireplace. She wasn't looking at Darius. She was knitting a quilt, her silver needles clicking together in a steady, rhythmic cadence of metal striking metal. She was wearing a simple floral dress and a cardigan, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked harmless, but there was something about the way she didn't look up, the way she didn't seem surprised, that made the hair on Darius's arms stand up. "Mama Esther," Darius said, forcing a mocking tone into his voice. "I didn't see you there. Blending in with the furniture, I see. I hope you heard me. You need to pack your bags. I've got a demolition crew coming to turn this fire hazard into something actually useful." Mama Esther stopped knitting. She slowly placed the needles down on the small table beside her. She took off her glasses and folded them. Finally, she lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were dark, deep, and terrifyingly calm. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a judge. "Darius King," she said, her voice sounding like dry leaves blowing over concrete. "You walked into my house with mud on your shoes. You didn't wipe your feet." Darius blinked, confused by the triviality of the statement. "I'm taking the house, old woman. I don't care about your floors." Mama Esther stood up slowly. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment she seemed to fill the room. She walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up a small, leather-bound notebook. It wasn't a Bible, it was a ledger, an old, black accounting book with the spine taped together. "You brag about what you built," Mama Esther said, walking toward him. Her steps were slow but steady. "But you didn't build anything, son. You stood on shoulders. You stood on Nia's shoulders. You stood on my shoulders. And now you think you're tall enough to touch the sun." She stopped just a foot away from him. Darius felt an urge to step back, but his pride wouldn't let him. "I'm done listening to your sermons, Esther," he spat. "Get out, now." Mama Esther smiled. It was a small, sad smile. We're leaving, Darius. We've been packed for 2 days. Darius frowned. Packed? How did you know? Mama Esther tapped the cover of the black notebook. Because I know you. I know a man who falls in love with money eventually tries to eat the hand that feeds him. But before we go, I have something for you. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a set of keys. They weren't the house keys. They were old, rusted iron keys on a heavy ring. She pressed them into Darius's hand. He took them automatically, looking down at the strange, heavy metal. What is this? He asked. The keys to the shed. I'm bulldozing that too. Mama Esther shook her head. No, Darius, those are the keys to the gate at the West Side Rail Yard, the one you use for your overflow shipping. Darius froze. How do you have these? That yard is leased from a holding company. Mama Esther turned to Nia and gently pulled her up from the floor, wiping the tears from her daughter's face. Come on, baby. Let's go. The air in here is getting stale. Wait, Darius shouted, grabbing Mama Esther's arm. The moment his hand touched her cardigan, he felt a shock, like static electricity but stronger. He recoiled. Answer me, why do you have those keys? Mama Esther looked at the spot where he had touched her, then back at his face. You should read your contracts more carefully, Darius. The holding company you lease from, the one you pay $40,000 a month to, it's called Jubilee Holdings, isn't it? Darius nodded slowly, his throat feeling dry. Yes, so what? Jubilee, Mama Esther whispered. Leviticus 25, the year of release, the year the land returns to its original owner. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling Nia with her. Darius followed, stumbling slightly. I am the owner, Darius, he screamed after them. I am the CEO. Mama Esther stopped at the bottom of the steps, next to the battered pickup truck Nia had loaded with boxes. She turned back one last time. You are the tenant, Darius, and as of this morning, your eviction notice has been filed, not for this house, for your life. She got into the truck. The engine sputtered and roared to life, coughing out a cloud of black smoke. Darius stood on the porch of the empty house, holding the rusted keys, watching them drive away. The rain started again, cold and sharp. He looked down at the keys in his hand. Jubilee Holdings. He had signed those checks for 10 years. He had never met the owner. He had always assumed it was some faceless corporation in New York. A pit of dread opened up in his stomach, vast and deep. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, who was still sitting in his car at the curb, staring straight ahead with a look of pure horror. Marcus, Darius yelled into the phone. Look up Jubilee Holdings. Now, who is the signatory? He watched through the rain as Marcus picked up his phone in the car below. He saw Marcus type on his iPad. He saw Marcus freeze. He saw Marcus look up at the porch, his face white as a sheet. Darius, Marcus's voice came through the speaker, trembling so hard it was barely audible. The signatory, the sole proprietor of Jubilee Holdings, it's not a corporation. Who is it? Darius screamed, crushing the rusted keys in his fist until they cut his skin. It's Esther Vance, Marcus whispered. It's her. She owns the rail yard. She owns the distribution center land. Darius, she owns the ground under the headquarters. Darius dropped the phone. It clattered onto the wooden porch, the screen cracking down the middle. He looked at the empty street where the pickup truck had disappeared. He looked at the mud on his shoes. He looked at the rusted keys that were now smeared with a drop of his own blood. For the first time in his life, Darius King didn't feel like a king. He felt like a trespasser. And the landlord had just come home. Darius King stormed into his corner office on the 42nd floor of the King Logistics Tower, his wet Italian leather shoes leaving frantic, muddy footprints on the pristine white marble floor. He didn't bother to close the door behind him. He marched straight to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city of Atlanta, staring down at the streets below through the relentless rain. Usually, this view made him feel like a god looking down on his creation, but today, the cars looked like beetles scuttling away from a boot, and the gray sky felt like a prison ceiling lowering inch by inch. He ripped the silk tie from his neck and threw it across the room, where it landed in a heap on one of the guest chairs. His chest was heaving, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The image of Mama Esther standing on that porch, holding those rusted iron keys, was burned into his retinas. Jubilee Holdings. The name echoed in his mind, mocking him. He spun around as Marcus stumbled into the office, clutching a stack of files to his chest like a shield. Marcus looked even worse than Darius. His face was the color of old ash, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the chill of the air conditioning. "Tell me it's a mistake, Marcus," Darius growled, pacing behind his massive mahogany desk. "Tell me you looked up the wrong tax ID number. Tell me that old woman does not own the land under my headquarters. I built this tower, I poured the concrete, I cut the ribbon with the mayor." Marcus dropped the files onto the desk. They splayed open, revealing deed maps, historical land grants, and corporate registration documents. Marcus sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. "It's not a mistake, Darius. I pulled the original land deeds from the city archives on the way over. It goes back to 1875. The land wasn't sold to the developer we leased from. It was placed in a perpetual trust by a freedman named Jeremiah Vance. That's Esther's great-grandfather. The trust stipulates that the land can be leased, but never sold, and the ownership remains with the direct matrilineal descendants." Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Darius, she doesn't just own the headquarters land. I cross-referenced the other properties. The Westside Rail Yard, Jubilee Holdings, the new warehouse district you're trying to break ground on, Jubilee Holdings, even the parking lot for the fleet maintenance crew, it's all her. You've been paying rent to your mother-in-law for 10 years. Darius felt the room spin. He gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She lives in a shack. She drives a truck that barely runs. If she has this kind of assets, why didn't she say something? Why did she let me treat her like that?" Marcus let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Because you never asked, Darius. You never asked who owned the land. You just signed the checks to the holding company because the rates were below market value. You thought you were getting a deal. You thought you were robbing a faceless corporation." Marcus paused, swallowing hard. "But she was subsidizing you. She kept the rent low to help the business grow. She was helping you build this empire, Darius, and you just evicted her." "I didn't know," Darius roared, swiping a crystal decanter off his desk. It flew across the room and shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass and expensive scotch raining down onto the carpet. "She set me up. This is entrapment. It's a long con." He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he tried to dial the number for the head of security. "I'm going to lock down the site. I'm going to put armed guards at the gates. If she thinks she can just walk in here and take my company, she's insane. Possession is 9/10 of the law." He held the phone to his ear, waiting for the connection. It rang and rang. Finally, a voice picked up, but it wasn't his head of security, Big Mike. It was a recorded automated message. "The number you have reached is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again." Darius stared at the phone. "What is going on?" Suddenly, the intercom on his desk buzzed. It was his executive assistant, Sarah. Her voice sounded thin and terrified. "Mr. King, I have a situation in the lobby." Darius slammed his hand on the speaker button. "I don't care about the lobby, Sarah. I'm in a crisis meeting. Send them away." "I can't, sir," Sarah stammered. "It's the police and the fire marshal and the Department of Transportation. They're blocking the elevators. They say they have orders to shut down the building." Darius's blood ran cold. He ran back to the window. Down below, flashing blue and red lights cut through the gloom of the rainy afternoon. Police cruisers and city utility trucks had formed a barricade across the main entrance of King Logistics. He saw men in yellow vests unrolling caution tape across the revolving doors. "Marcus, fix this!" Darius screamed, grabbing the lawyer by the lapels of his jacket and hauling him out of the chair. "Go down there and file an injunction. Threaten them, bribe them, do whatever you do." Marcus held up his hands in surrender, his eyes darting around the room. "I can't stop a fire marshal, Darius. If they found a code violation, they can shut us down for 72 hours minimum. That's 3 days without shipping, the contracts, the perishable goods. We'll lose millions." Darius shoved Marcus back into the chair. "It's not a code violation," he hissed. "It's her. She pulled the permits. It's the landlord. She called the city." He began to pace the room like a caged tiger. Okay, we play hardball. If she wants to choke the business, I'll choke her funding. Marcus, drain the operating accounts. Move everything to the Cayman Shell Company. I want the liquidity gone. If she seizes the company, I want her to seize a corpse." Marcus froze. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at his lap. "About that, Darius, I tried to access the Cayman portal while you were in the bathroom. The password didn't work." Darius stopped pacing. The silence in the room was sudden and deafening. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass. "What did you say?" Darius asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The password," Marcus whispered. "It was changed, at 9 in the morning, right around the time you were evicting them." Darius felt a wave of nausea crash over him. The Cayman account held $12 million. It was his escape hatch. It was his retirement. It was the money he had stolen from the company profits over the last 5 years, hiding it from Nia and the IRS. "Who changed it?" Darius demanded, looming over the desk. "Only 2 people have those codes, Marcus. Me and you. Did you steal my money?" Marcus shook his head violently, sweat flying from his brow. No, Darius, I swear, I checked the access logs. The login came from a local IP address. It came from the West End. From Nia's mother's house." Darius slumped into his leather chair, the fight draining out of him. Nia had the codes, but how? She didn't know anything about offshore banking. She was a teacher. She read romance novels and baked cinnamon rolls, unless she hadn't been reading romance novels, unless she had been reading his emails. "She's been watching me," Darius whispered, staring at the ceiling. "The whole time, while I was bragging, while I was planning, she was watching." He suddenly remembered the notebook Mama Esther had held. The black ledger, the serial numbers. She moved the money, Darius realized. She didn't just freeze it, she moved it. He grabbed his laptop and frantically tried to log into the main corporate account at First National Bank. Access denied. He tried the secondary payroll account. Access denied. He tried his personal checking account. Access denied. A red banner scrolled across the top of the banking screen. Account frozen by court order pending investigation into fraud and embezzlement. The text message, Darius muttered. The lease wasn't the only thing that expired. The door to his office burst open again. This time it wasn't Marcus or the police. It was Chloe. She was soaking wet, her designer hair ruined, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. She wasn't wearing her engagement ring. She was holding a stack of declined credit card receipts in her manicured hand. "You liar," she screamed, storming into the room and throwing the receipts at his face. "You told me you were rich. You told me you were the king. I just tried to buy a latte at Starbucks and my card was declined. I tried to check into the Four Seasons and they cut up my platinum card at the front desk." Darius stood up, his face twisting with rage. "Not now, Chloe. I am dealing with a hostile takeover." Chloe laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "Hostile takeover? You're broke, Darius. I just saw the news in the lobby." Channel 5 is reporting that King Logistics is under investigation for a massive Ponzi scheme involving the theft of family trust funds. "They're saying you stole from your wife's inheritance to start the company." Darius felt the walls closing in. "That's a lie. I built this company," Chloe sneered, backing away from him. "You built it on a loan you never paid back. I'm leaving, Darius. I'm going to stay with my sister in Miami. And don't bother calling me. I blocked your number." She turned on her heel and marched out, stepping over the shattered glass of the decanter without looking back. Darius was alone with Marcus, who was shivering in the chair and the ghost of his empire crumbling around him. He looked at the lawyer. "Get out," Darius said. "Go down to the lobby, talk to the police, stall them, tell them I'm cooperating, tell them it's a misunderstanding." Marcus stood up slowly, nodding. "Okay, Darius, I'll go talk to them." Marcus gathered his files and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. He looked back at Darius, and for a split second, the look of terror on his face vanished, replaced by something unreadable, something cold. "You know, Darius," Marcus said softly, "Esther always said arrogance was a blinding light. It keeps you from seeing the cliff." Before Darius could respond, Marcus slipped out the door and closed it softly. Darius was trapped. He went to the hidden safe behind the oil painting of himself that hung on the east wall. He spun the dial. Right, left, right. The heavy steel door swung open. He reached inside for his emergency cash stash, $50,000 he kept for bribes and emergencies. The safe was empty. No, not empty. Sitting in the center of the velvet-lined shelf was a single, ripe red tomato, and underneath it, a note written in elegant cursive, "You reap what you sow." Darius stared at the tomato. It was a message. A taunt. Mama Esther had been in his office. She had been in his safe. She had been everywhere. A primal scream built up in his chest, a roar of pure, impotent fury. He swept the tomato off the shelf and crushed it under his heel, staining the white carpet red. "You want a war, old woman," he hissed to the empty room. "I'll give you a war." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a burner phone, the one device she couldn't possibly know about. He dialed a number he hadn't used in 2 years. It was the number for a man named Rocco, a dirty private investigator who specialized in planting evidence. "Rocco," Darius said when the gravelly voice answered. "It's time for the nuclear option. The package we prepped for Nia's car, the drugs, the stolen hard drives, make the call, tip off the police. I want her arrested tonight. If I'm going down, she's coming with me." Rocco didn't answer immediately. There was a crackle of static on the line. "Mr. King," Rocco said finally, "I think you should check the trunk of your own car before you make that call." Darius frowned. "What are you talking about?" Rocco hung up. Darius ran out of the office, ignoring the ringing phones, ignoring the shouting from the hallway where the police were arguing with his secretary. He took the private service elevator down to the underground garage. It was dark and smelled of oil and exhaust. His black Mercedes was parked in its reserved spot. He ran to it, fumbling with his keys. He popped the trunk. The lid hissed open. Darius looked inside and felt his heart stop beating. The duffel bag he had paid Rocco to plant in Nia's Honda was sitting there in his trunk. He unzipped it with shaking hands. Inside were the bricks of cocaine he had ordered planted and the hard drives containing the evidence of his embezzlement. And resting on top of the drugs was a business card, Jubilee Holdings. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. They weren't coming for the building. They were coming for him. Darius slammed the trunk shut, but it wouldn't latch. The lock had been jammed. He looked up and saw the security camera in the corner of the garage slowly rotate to point directly at him. The red recording light pulsed steadily in the darkness, watching him like a winking, mechanical eye. It was like a winking eye. Darius backed away from the car, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He turned to run back to the elevator, but the doors opened before he could reach them. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, guns drawn. Behind them walked a detective in a trench coat, and behind him, Marcus. But Marcus wasn't cowering anymore. He was standing tall, holding a tablet. He pointed at Darius. "That's him, officers," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. "That's the man who ordered the evidence to be planted. I have the audio recording of his call to the hitman." Darius stared at Marcus, the betrayal piercing through his confusion like a spear. "Marcus," he whispered. "You work for me." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, Darius, I worked for your father-in-law 20 years ago, and I've been Mama Esther's godson since the day I was born. You didn't hire me, she placed me." The officers moved in, grabbing Darius by the arms. "Darius King, you are under arrest for possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit perjury." As they slapped the handcuffs on his wrists, tight and cold, Darius looked at Marcus. "Why?" he rasped. "Why wait 10 years? Why let me build all this just to tear it down?" Marcus leaned in close so only Darius could hear. "Because a tower falls harder than a shack, Darius. Mama Esther wanted to make sure that when you fell, the whole world would hear the crash." They dragged him toward the patrol car. The rain was falling harder now, washing the mud from his shoes but unable to wash away the stain of his ruin. As he was shoved into the back seat, Darius looked out the window. Across the street, parked under the awning of a bus stop, was the battered pickup truck. The window was down. Mama Esther sat in the driver's seat. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She simply nodded once, shifted the truck into gear, and drove away slowly, obeying the speed limit, leaving the King of Atlanta in chains. Darius King sat on the cold metal bench of a holding cell in the Fulton County Jail, the smell of bleach and unwashed bodies assaulting his senses. It had been 48 hours since his arrest, and the reality of his situation was settling in like a heavy, suffocating fog. He was still wearing his bespoke charcoal suit, but it was now wrinkled and stained with sweat, a pathetic reminder of the power he had wielded just 2 days ago. He had spent the first 12 hours screaming at the guards, demanding his phone call, demanding to speak to the warden, demanding that someone recognize who he was. But in here, he wasn't a CEO. He was just inmate number 89,402. When he finally got his phone call, he didn't call a lawyer. He called Senator Williams, a man whose re-election campaign Darius had funded with 6 figures of consulting fees. The line rang 4 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. It wasn't the senator, it was an aide. When Darius identified himself, the line went dead instantly. He called the mayor's private line. Blocked. He called his golf partners, his board members, his drinking buddies. Silence. The city of Atlanta hadn't just turned its back on him, it had erased him. The heavy steel door to the cell block buzzed and slid open with a grinding mechanical noise. A guard stepped in, followed by a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Thorne," the guard barked. "Your lawyer is here." Darius stood up, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. Maybe Marcus had come to his senses. Maybe this was all a twisted negotiation tactic. But when the young man sat down on the other side of the plexiglass in the visitation room, Darius knew it was over. "Mr. King," the man said, shuffling a stack of messy papers. "My name is Mr. Henderson. I'm your public defender." Darius laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "I don't need a public defender. I have millions in assets. I can hire the best defense team in the state." Henderson looked up, his eyes filled with pity. "Mr. King, your assets have been frozen by the federal government under the RICO Act. Your personal accounts were drained before the freeze took effect. According to the bank, the funds were transferred to a verified charity for displaced families. You are, for all intents and purposes, indigent. You can't afford a vending machine sandwich, let alone a private attorney." Darius stared at the scratched plexiglass. A charity. Esther had taken his stolen millions, money he had bled from the company, and given it away. She didn't want the money, she just wanted him to not have it. The malice of it, the absolute precision of her revenge, took his breath away. "So what's the plan?" Darius whispered. "How do we beat this?" Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples. "We don't beat this, Mr. King. They have the drugs in your trunk. They have the hard drives with your fingerprints on them. They have your former attorney, Marcus, testifying that you ordered the hit on your wife's reputation. They have audio recordings. The district attorney is looking for a headline. He wants to put you away for 20 years. My advice, plead guilty, beg for mercy, hope the judge is having a good day. 6 months later, Darius King stood in the same courtroom where he had celebrated his divorce. But the atmosphere was different now. The gallery wasn't empty. It was packed with reporters, former employees he had fired, and the community members of the West End whose homes he had threatened to bulldoze. And sitting in the front row, looking like royalty in a simple navy blue dress, was Nia. Next to her sat Mama Esther, her hands folded calmly in her lap, wearing the same Sunday hat she had worn the day Darius thought he had won. The Honorable Judge Harrison entered the room, her black robes flowing around her like the wings of a crow. She took her seat and looked down at Darius over the rim of her glasses. There was no warmth in her eyes. "Mr. King," the judge began, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You have been found guilty on 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything to say?" Darius stood up. His legs felt weak. He looked back at the gallery. He wanted to scream at them. He wanted to tell them that he was a job creator, a visionary, a king. But when he opened his mouth, nothing came out. He looked at Nia. She wasn't crying this time. She was looking at him with a clear, steady gaze. It wasn't hate he saw in her eyes, it was indifference. He had become nothing to her. He turned to Mama Esther. The old woman nodded slowly, a gesture that felt like a final benediction on a grave. Darius stammered, his voice trembling. "I was a businessman. I took risks." The judge cut him off. "You were a predator, Mr. King. You mistook kindness for weakness. You exploited your wife's family, stole their heritage, and tried to destroy their reputation to cover your own greed. You thought you were building an empire, but you were just digging a hole." She banged the gavel, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. "Darius King, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the Jubilee Trust. Since you have no assets, your future wages in the prison work program will be garnished until the debt is paid." 2 marshals moved in behind him. As the cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists for the second time, Darius looked desperately at the gallery. "Nia," he shouted, his composure shattering. "Nia, tell them, I made you. You were nothing without me." Nia stood up. She walked to the railing that separated the free world from the defendant's table. She leaned in close so only he could hear. "You didn't make me, Darius," she whispered, her voice strong and steady. "You just distracted me. I'm awake now. And by the way, we're not building a parking lot on Mama's land. We're building a community center. We're naming it after your mother, the one you never visited." The marshals dragged him away. As he was hauled through the side door, the last thing Darius saw was Mama Esther standing up. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out the black notebook, and closed it. The book was finished. The debt was paid. 3 years later, the sun beat down on the exercise yard of the Federal Correctional Institution in Jessup, Georgia. Darius King wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty glove. He was no longer wearing Italian silk. He was wearing a faded gray jumpsuit with a number stenciled on the back. His job was to tend the prison vegetable garden, a cruel irony that the warden had assigned personally. Darius knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds from around a row of tomato plants. His hands, once manicured and soft, were now calloused and stained with soil. He hated the dirt. He hated the smell of it. But he had no choice. A guard walked by and tossed a crumpled newspaper onto the ground next to him. "Thought you might want to see this, King," the guard sneered before walking away. Darius picked up the paper. It was a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The headline on the front page read, "West End Renaissance, the Jubilee Center opens its doors." Below the headline was a large color photo. It showed a beautiful, modern community center made of brick and glass, surrounded by lush gardens. In the center of the photo, cutting the ribbon, was Nia. She looked radiant, laughing, holding the hand of a man Darius didn't recognize, a man who looked at her with adoration, not ownership. And standing next to them, looking small but mighty, was Mama Esther. Darius read the caption, "Funded by the recovered assets of the dissolved King Logistics, the Jubilee Center will provide financial literacy classes and legal aid to families fighting unjust evictions. We want to teach people that true power isn't about what you can take," says founder Nia Vance. "It's about what you can grow." Darius stared at the photo. He looked at the tomato plant in front of him. A single, small red fruit was hanging from the vine. He remembered the tomato in his safe. He remembered the text message. The lease has expired. He let the newspaper fall back into the dirt. He picked up his trowel and went back to work. There was no appeal coming. There was no secret account waiting for him. There was only the dirt, the sun, and the long, slow passage of time. Darius King had wanted to own the earth, but in the end, the earth had simply swallowed him whole. And somewhere in Atlanta, on a front porch surrounded by hydrangeas, an old woman hummed a gospel song, the black notebook collecting dust on a shelf, its pages filled with the arithmetic of justice. And that is the story of how Darius King lost his crown to the Queen of the West End. It just goes to show you that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. If you enjoyed this story of sweet, silent revenge, please make sure you like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that karma never loses an address. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story we have for you is even crazier. Thanks for listening.